Hi everyone, welcome to my Smart Learning YouTube channel. I hope you can make good use of my Smart Learning YouTube channel to learn more new knowledge and become a smarter and happier person. And since I have been spending lots of time and effort in making this kind of video, I would like to ask you to make some donation for me, and I accept your donation. You can make your donation through PayPal or Venmo. I welcome your donation. My PayPal account is paypal.me/gracef327. And my Venmo account is at grace_Rainier. Thank you very much for your support. So in this video, we will continue to talk about the topic of economic globalization, in particular, some of the commentaries of economic globalization. So in this slide, we are going to talk about justice and human rights, reflection on economic globalization. In the book, Has Globalization Gone Too Far? Danny Roderick proposed a discussion about the conflict between the global division of labor and domestic social systems, which is worth pondering. Let's suppose a company called XYZ, a small to medium-sized business in the United States, which was a manufacturer of shoes. Under the pressure from expanding imports and falling profits, the company decided to lay off 300 workers and subcontract its labor-intensive process to a company in Honduras. This practice restores profits for company XYZ. The laid-off workers also ended up finding jobs elsewhere, though some were forced to relocate to other towns, and most of them only found lower-paying jobs. According to the standards of international trade theory, that this is a kind of income redistribution to create greater overall economic benefits, which can be said to be a successful event. But what if everyone finds out that the subcontracting factory in Honduras is a sweatshop, employing 12-year-old workers in unsanitary and dangerous conditions? Most trade economists would argue that trade restrictions should not be imposed on other countries due to differences in labor laws and the actual situation of each country. But if company XYZ did not outsource the process, it closed the factory in the town and opened a sweatshop near the border between the United States and Mexico, bringing 12-year-old child laborers from Honduras to the United States to work. In economic terms, this approach is not much different from the previous outsourcing approach, and the economic distribution of all parties, including dismissed workers, company shareholders, and child labor in Honduras, remains the same. The actual difference is that this method is illegal. Every society has moral and legal restrictions on market behavior, such as prohibiting human trafficking, slavery, etc. Trade as a kind of market exchange must ultimately stand up to the moral standard of a society. Trade liberalization should not be seen as an end goal, regardless of how profitable the business will be. The two major problems of globalized production at the moral level are the legitimacy of benefit distribution and the humanitarian principle of labor conditions. Marginalization of workers in developed countries. Since industrialized countries have greater economic advantages and political strength to allow them to formulate trade terms that are beneficial to them, it is assumed that globalization is basically beneficial to the overall economic development of industrialized countries. In fact, globalization has increasingly marginalized a large numbers of low-skilled labor in industrialized countries. For detailed arguments, please refer to Chen Jinxi's article, The Career Crisis Under Globalization. With the globalized division of labor, workers of industrialized countries in lower skilled industries, such as garments, consumer electronics, and toys, cannot compete with workers in developing countries in terms of wages. In labor-intensive industries, Mexican workers are as productive as the U.S., but they only make 1/10 of the wages of U.S. workers. According to the National Economics School of Economics, competition due to foreign importation has caused about 6.4 million jobs lost in the United States. In the capital-intensive and high-tech industries, or the information service industries, such as financial services, the jobs created may not be able to offset the loss of jobs brought by imports, as these industries need higher job skills and higher education level. Therefore, under the new labor market structure, those with lower education can only work in basic service industries, such as cleaners or security guards. The high substitutability of these low-skilled workers, that is, the employer can easily replace them with another worker, makes their employment situation very precarious and make them less able to bargain with their employers. In order to defeat other competitors in the global market, industrial countries must try to reduce production costs. Therefore, the wages of these marginal laborers who lack bargaining power are constantly depressed. Owing to import competition, the School of International Economics points out that only 1/3 of the Americans who lose their jobs are re-employed in jobs of equal or higher wages. In the old economic structure, the living standard of ordinary workers was related to the overall economic development of the country. However, under the new economic structure of global division of labor, even if the economy of industrialized countries improves, it is mainly driven by high-tech industry or information service industries. Marginal workers engaged in the basic service industry have not been able to share the fruits of economic growth. In the United States, from the 1970s to 1998, wages for low-skilled workers fell by 20%, despite high overall economic growth. Now let's look at the labor situation in developing countries. Labor rights issues of workers in developing countries. The previous session mentioned the relationship between Nike's commercial success and global production. In fact, the dispute over workers' rights caused by Nike's global subcontracting system is also a typical case of the so-called race to the bottom. A closer look at the situation of workers employed by Nike's subcontracting manufacturers will help us to see the relationship between globalized production and workers' rights. The following is the information from Richard Lott's report, The Promise and Perils of Globalization, the Case of Nike. Global production and labor rights, Nike case. In the year 2001, Nike has 736 subcontracted manufacturers in 51 regions or countries, including 401 in Asia and 556,722 contract workers, including 467,146 in Asia. In terms of workers, they are in China. In China, Nike has 74 factories, 175,960 workers. In Indonesia, Nike has 30 factories, 104,514 workers. In Thailand, Nike has 62 factories, 42,962 workers. And in Vietnam, Nike has 12 factories, 43,414 workers. Back in the 1980s, Nike had been criticized for disregarding workers' rights, hiring subcontracted producers and workers with low incomes, poor work environments, and complaints of human rights violations. By the 1990s, Nike had faced a series of complaints about workers' rights, including cheap labor in Indonesia, child labor in Cambodia and Pakistan, and harsh workplace environments in China and Vietnam. Even Nike chairman Phil Knight publicly told reporters in 1998, Nike products have been implicated in exploitation, forced overtime, and arbitrary abuse. Minimum wage in Indonesia. In the early 1990s, Nike has 6 contract manufacturers in Indonesia with more than 25,000 workers. The factory had been heavily criticized by NGOs and large groups for exploiting workers, poor working conditions, and human rights abuse. The factories even asked the Indonesian government to waive the statutory minimum wage, about $1 per day in US dollar at current price. In 1993, after being reported by CBS in the United States, there was a great response in the United States. At first, Nike said the problems were only with contract manufacturers. After the mid-1990s, Nike instructed its manufacturers to stop applying for exemptions from minimum wage requirements. In April 1999, the Indonesian government raised the minimum wage to $26 a month, and Nike announced that each worker would be paid between $30 and $37.5 a month. Child labor in Pakistan. The city of Sialkot in Pakistan is the world's major football producer, accounting for 70% of the world's competitive football production in the 1990s. In June 1996, the American Life magazine reported that Pakistani child laborers were producing footballs for Nike, which made Nike greatly criticized at home. Nike then demanded that all contract manufacturers stop employing child labor. However, the International Labour Organization later reported that many local producers still employed child labor. Workers' health and safety issues in Vietnam. In November 1997, a Nike contract manufacturer in Vietnam was found to have seriously violated the workers' health and safety regulations during the factory inspection, and the amount of toluene in the air greatly exceeds the standard by 6 to 177 times. The chemical also caused workers to suffer from skin disease, heart disease, respiratory disease, and other problems. Nike's response. In the early days, Nike held the attitude of worker problems are managed by contract manufacturers and did not take direct measures. It was not until 1992 that a code of conduct was introduced to regulate the working environment and safety standards that contract manufacturers should pay attention to. Number 1. Respect employee rights, including freedom of association and collective bargaining. Number 2. Mitigate damage to the environment. Number 3. Provide a safe and healthy working environment. Number 4. Improve employee health. By 1998, Nike has set a minimum wage of 18 for footwear workers and 16 for other workers. It is also proposed that all footwear factories must comply with the indoor air standards of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration of the United States. By the year 2000, Nike formed the Corporate Responsibility and Compliance Department. In addition, Nike is also subject to external monitoring and abide by a series of human rights, labor rights, and environmental protection principles of the United Nations Global Compact, and also participate in voluntary NGOs such as the Global Alliance for Workers and Communities and the Fair Labor Association. For detail, please refer to Nike's responsibility webpage. Nike's responsibility webpage. At present, Nike's core standards for labor protection include: number 1, prohibition of forced labor; number 2, prohibition of child labor; number 3, ensure minimum wage protection; number 4, ensuring statutory labor benefits; number 5, legal working hours and overtime compensation limits based on no more than 60 hours per week; number 6, environmental safety and health standards; number 7, data archiving and verification about the factory. The case of Nike allows us to further explore the problems faced by workers in developing countries in the International Division of Labor System. Now, the international community is basically aware of the disadvantaged situation of workers in developing countries, but there is no consensus on the solution. In Nike's case, we see that multinational companies have gradually changed from an attitude of "it's none of their business" in the early days to acknowledging problems and seeking solutions. Today, many multinational corporations have formed human rights departments or corporate responsibility departments to deal with the above-mentioned issues internally. The role of civil society in economic globalization. The race to the bottom practice derived from the global production strategy of multinational corporations and the protection of labor rights have become hot topics of globalization disputes. What we are seeing at this stage is that organizations at different levels are facing up to the issues of labor security and working together to find solutions. Self-regulatory systems based on the goodwill of enterprise, as well as monitoring actions taken by consumers and the media, are relatively low, and the force of checks and balance and monitoring is always insufficient. The problem is often the transfer of responsibility from one layer to another. At present, independent monitoring inspection agencies have emerged internationally, which is also an important development of the global labor protection system. As a result, enterprises are not only self-enforcing labor rights, nor are individual governments acting independently, but international organizations are responsible for the problems arising from the International Division of Labor. Action by the international community. From this, we also understand an important aspect of globalization. That is, new problems that often arise in globalization require new systems and institutions to balance and adjust. There are three important aspects of managing globalized production. First, setting standards. Second, enforcement and monitoring. Third, assisting relevant agencies to meet the standards and gradually finding a clear path. Basically, everyone has a basic standard which has gradually formed. Independent institutions and organizations are responsible for the protection of labor, and this aspect is also developing rapidly. The basic principle of the International Labour Office, ILO, the ILO Declaration on Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work, adopted in 1998, includes four major principles. First, freedom to organize trade unions and the right to collective bargaining. Second, eliminate forced labor. Third, prohibit child labor. Fourth, eliminate discrimination in the workplace. The various labor issues derived from economic globalization are no longer simply confined to the framework of the market, government, and enterprise. The response and action of the international community have also become a major force. As mentioned earlier, globalized production will create a series of unclear rights and responsibilities between and within countries. Civil society's response and the resulting policy repercussions have instead allowed everyone to see a way out. Should a social clause be included in a free trade agreement? There is a proposal to add labor standards to the WTO clause. If a country fails to meet the most basic labor protection standard, the international community can impose trade sanctions. In this way, the terms of the WTO can not only protect the investment environment of multinational corporations, but also protect the labor of different countries in free trade. However, there are worries that these thresholds are too high, which in turn will affect the opportunities for backward countries to develop their economies by joining the global production system. It is not easy to reach a consensus based on the resolution process of the WTO, and basically the issue of labor rights and interests is difficult to resolve at the level of the WTO. For the issue of social standard of labor, please refer to Stephen Chew's Globalization and Social Standard in Employment, an Asian Perspective. The contract between business and society. Social dissatisfaction in response to a company's behavior will affect the company's market share and profitability. The inspection of NGOs and the voluntary participation of enterprise in some labor security provision can be a development of social norms for enterprise behavior. There are already many such labor organizations or charters in operation. The advantage of this kind of development is that a series of newly acceptable codes can be negotiated according to the nature of different enterprises and industries. Many multinational companies have listed their own code of conduct, or participate in some companies' voluntary monitoring organization, or voluntarily accept the supervision of independent organizations. For example, in the garment industry, there are the Fair Labor Association, FLA, led by the U.S. government. It brings together organizations from various sectors, including clothing and shoemaking companies, human rights organizations, labor unions, religious groups, consumer organizations, etc., based on the ILO standards, with independent monitoring and certification bodies implementing relevant agreements. Participants including Adidas, Solomon, Nike, Reebok, Polo Ralph Lauren, etc. Worldwide Responsible Apparel Production Program (WRAP). The American garment industry is a self-organized organization with more than 700 members, including many well-known brands, to ensure that manufacturers supplying the American market meet certain labor security standards, and there are independent inspection agencies. Members are mainly exporter organizations and chambers of commerce in various places. Clean Clothes Campaign, CCC. Clean Clothes Campaign. It is the campaigns in Europe that bring together trade unions, consumer groups, academics, women's rights groups, and other social movements to connect and pressure retailers and clothing companies to improve working conditions. Based on ILO conventions, including the prohibition of child labor, minimum wage guarantees, collective bargaining, free organized trade unions, etc. Alternative economic models. Fair trade campaign. Civil society has also initiated reforms to the international trade system. Among them, the Fair Trade Campaign is a campaign launched by Oxfam against unfair rules imposed by industrial countries on developing countries. Basically, the fair trade movement is just against unfair trade rules and affirms global trade itself. One of the important issues of this movement is to require industrial countries to open their markets, change the WTO agreement on intellectual property rights, stop the World Bank and the IMF from forcing developing countries to open their markets. It also wants to change the WTO agreement and prevent the opening of its surface markets. It doesn't want the WTO to launch new negotiation issues. Simply put, these initiatives are mainly aimed at maintaining the autonomy of developing countries in their economic policies and reducing the disadvantaged positions of developing countries in current international trade. Fair trade campaigns can take many forms, including direct pressure on governments and multinational corporations, public pressure by publishing reports, and consumer campaigns, such as Box 5 Fair Coffee Trade Campaign. So here is Box 5. It shows the fair coffee trade movement. Based on the increasing awareness of international fairness among consumers and the fact that labor-intensive products or raw materials produced in developing countries account for a small percentage of the final price of consumer goods. This provides the condition for a consumer movement. One of Oxfam's campaigns for fairness in the coffee trade. It is to ask consumers to pay more to buy coffee that gives a fair return to coffee farmers. Only 1.8% of the revenue from a bag of coffee that is retailed on the market ends up going to the farmers. 90.2% goes to roasters, retailers, and tariffs in industrialized countries, which is the basis for consumer movement that launched the concept of fair trade coffee. Fair trade coffee is driven by the consumer movement. It purchases coffee from farmers, cooperatives. It purchases It purchases coffee from farmers' cooperatives at fair trade price. By selling a portion of the profits of fair coffee, it helps farmers to improve their production techniques so that these farmers can produce higher quality and environmental friendly products. Community economic movement. The social reforms and social movements introduced earlier are basically just against unfair trade rules, not against globalized production or international trade per se. However, advocates with more radical views claim that globalization as a mode of consumption and production obliterates the autonomy of production, consumption, and even life in local communities. A part of the anti-globalization movement is against the very idea of globalization itself, and their movement is to draw boundaries and organize themselves to prevent the forces of globalization from infiltrating into their economic systems and lives. Part 6. Community economic movement. So here in box 6 is shown the community economic movement. The community economic movement is just the opposite of the concept of globalization, emphasizing a relatively closed economic system with the community as the unit. One of the response methods of the community economic movement is to set up cooperatives in the community. The members of these cooperatives are often low-income people in the region, and the goals to be achieved can be roughly divided into 4 points. First, provide employment opportunities for low-income people in the region. Second, take care of the specific needs of the community, especially some marginalized groups. Third, help to build a sense of community and promote mutual assistance, so that the resources of the able bodies in the community can be diverted to the less disadvantaged. Number 4. Fourth, through the cooperatives learning classes, seminars, or the process of democratic decision-making in the cooperatives, it helps to improve the ability of individual members and increase their development opportunity. A larger-scale community economic movement is the Community Currency Program. The idea of the Community Currency Plan is to reissue a specific currency in the community to promote the exchange of activities produced in the community, prevent the external loss of community resources, and reset the exchange rate of community production activities. The largest community currency program in the world is the LETS program, launched by Canada in 1982. This program simply means that members open accounts in community currency and conduct transactions in the community in this currency. By 1995, it has expanded to a total of approximately 1,500 LETS organizations worldwide, with a total membership of approximately 20,000. In summary, Let's talk about the political balance and social constraints in economic issues. Economic globalization has made beautiful promise to the world, believing that through free trade and international division of labor, the world will embark on a road to poverty alleviation. Unfortunately, the reality is that the rich are getting richer, and some poor countries have been lifted out of poverty, but the number of poor people in the world is still huge. In the final analysis, international trade itself lacks opportunities for equal participation, and the international trade system itself is not necessarily very beneficial to backward countries. The inequality of international political powers distort the international trade system, and the agreements reached are often beneficial to existing powers and developed countries. The distribution of benefits does not help the marginal countries and the poor. In addition, with the influences of international political relationships and geographical locations, many backward countries have been excluded from international trade activities. The positive significance of the debate on the outcome of economic globalization is to let us understand its multifaceted nature and to know that society must regulate economic behavior and to know the pace and aspects of economic globalization, which is also a social choice in a sense. Full-scale protectionist countries have been less successful, but the effects of rapid trade liberalization are equally doubtful. Recently, the IMF and the World Bank have also begun to realize that the market and free trade are not a panacea and cannot help the world out of poverty. The World Bank's Globalization, Growth and Poverty, Building an Inclusive World Economy, published in the year 2002, put forward 7 reform proposals. Number 1. Development issue in trade talks, urging developed countries to reduce tariffs and agricultural subsidies. Number 2. Improve the investment climate in developing countries, build clean and efficient governments, strengthen protection of private property rights and the rule of law. Number 3. Provide education and health services. Encourage countries to invest resources in education and health. Number 4. Provide social security for labor market transitions. Provide a social safety net for workers as they adapt to labor market transitions. Number 5. Rich countries need to increase foreign aid. Rich countries should provide assistance to developing countries, especially those that are geographically disadvantaged. Number 6. Support reforms through debt relief. Provide external debt relief to poor countries to help these countries improve their investment climate and benefit from globalization. Number 7. Dealing with rising global temperature. The international community must face up to the greenhouse effect and understand that this problem is especially serious for poor countries and the poor. As a result, we have seen that while free trade is developing, international political cooperation and humanitarian assistance are indispensable. In particular, the benefits of globalization are often not immediate, but the problems of victims are immediate. Free trade may be able to alleviate poverty, but only relies on international trade and free market measures to lift the world out of poverty. It is a long way off. The international community is becoming more and more aware that, in addition to market freedom, the development of globalization actually requires an international political structure with equal participation, where governments everywhere are more able to govern and understand that backward countries should be allowed to progress step by step, and provide a safety net for the vulnerable groups of society who are victims of globalization.